Hi, Rich Leiter here, and welcome to my channel, Thoughts on Writing. Today, I'm going to do a book review of a book entitled The Unbearable Heaviness of Being. Not the unbearable lightness, the unbearable heaviness of being, by an author named Carroll Wainwright. Carroll, C-A-R-R-O-L-L. It's a man. It's going to be kind of a rambling review. I have a lot to say. I'm not the greatest reviewer in the world. I'm not the greatest extemporaneous speaker. I feel much more comfortable writing. When you're speaking, when you're writing and you have a new thought or you want to correct something, you just go back to the writing, you cross out what you want and you revise it or something like that. You can't do that when you're speaking, you got to get it in once, and if you think of something else later, tough luck. The only other way I could do this would be to read a script, and I don't want to do that. That's kind of like robotic. So I apologize, but I got a lot to say about this book, and I have a little outline, but so I don't miss too much stuff, but I'll do the best I can. So anyway, how did I come to read? And by the way, I can't show you the book because the author was kind enough to send me a PDF of it since I told him that I was going to do a book review of it. But again, it's The Unbearable Heaviness of Being by Carroll Wainwright. Now, how did I come to even know about this book? Well, I just happened to stumble across Carroll Wainwright's YouTube channel. He goes by the code name The Falcon Reads. So if you type in Carroll Wainwright, I don't think you'll get his channel, but if you type in The Falcon Reads, you will. And he has his own YouTube channel with many book reviews. So one of the book reviews that he did was on his own book, this particular book. And he claims that this book, it was like a 20-minute video he did, and he claims that in this book that this is the most important book ever written. Now, he didn't say it's the greatest book ever written. He clarifies that. He says he's not that egomaniacal, but it is the most important book ever written. Okay, that kind of piqued my interest. But, a lot of people make stupid statements about a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm going to be interested in them. But I started listening to, some of his book reviews. And, I've listened to a lot of book reviews in the last couple of years. And I do book reviews sporadically. I have to say, of all of the ones that I've watched, I like this guy the best. He's short, concise, to the point, very articulate, very engaging from the get-go. So far, this is the best book reviewer, booktuber that I've found. He's a heck of a lot better than me. Well, a lot of people are. So I listened to him. I said, this guy, he's got something. And then coupled with that, he says he's got the most important book ever written. So I say, I'd like to check this out. So that's how I came to The Unbearable Heaviness of Being. Okay, so what's the plot of this book? What's this book about? This book is around, first of all, the book is not too big, not too long. It's about 280 pages, but each of the pages has very little print on it. It's like a very short page when it's formatted. So it's actually probably less than 280 pages, probably in a more conventional formatting, with the lines being longer each line. It's probably about, 240 pages, 230. I read the whole, I'm an extremely slow reader, and I read this whole book in 2.5 days with taking notes also. So it was a very quick read for me. A very quick read and a very enjoyable read too. So what's the plot of this novel? It's kind of a fantasy novel, a fantasy dystopian novel. As Wainwright himself says, it's kind of has great similarities to the Handmaid's Tale, which I haven't read. So it takes place at some unspecified time in history. I thought it was the Middle Ages at first, but maybe it's not. And the premise is that the Earth has been ravaged by not the Black Death, the Red Death. So it's it's pretty obvious that he's talking about the Black Death, the bubonic plague, and that most of humanity has been wiped out, and that it's very important in order that the species replenish itself as quickly as possible, or else humanity will be erased from existence. So what happens is certain women must be impregnated against their will just to perpetuate the species. And it's kind of a post-apocalyptic scenario where we no longer have states, we have little fiefdoms, and each fiefdom is controlled by a lord who has a castle, which sounds remarkably prescient. I mean, we may very well go back to that if our economy continues to go off the face of a cliff the way it is. But anyway, that's an aside. And there's the one particular character. There's this person called the Coxman, and the Coxman is this person who is locked in a cage, and he is presided over by another character called the Stud Master, and they just kind of go from fiefdom to fiefdom, and the Stud Master will unlock the Coxman from its cage, and then the Coxman will, against their will, impregnate women so that they can get pregnant and perpetuate the species. And there is one particular fiefdom and one particular character in it. Her name is Lisa Vetta. She's a maiden, a young woman, probably not a teenager anymore. She's probably, I'd say in her early 20s, maybe younger. And she is destined to be impregnated. She's scheduled to be impregnated by the Coxman against her will, of course. And she decides that she doesn't want to be impregnated. She's very much against it. She's against the whole idea of being forced to do anything against her will, and she leaves she escapes the castle that she's in with a servant named Erasmus, and they both escape and try to flee the castle and being impregnated, and her father is the lord of the castle, Lord Vax. And so from the moment that she and Erasmus leave, Lord Vax is after her, tells his soldiers to track her down and bring her back. And it's so in this respect, it's kind of an adventure story. It's an escape story. It's got a real plot with lots of twists and turns to it, and it's very exciting because what escape story? Escape from Alcatraz, escape from Stalag 17. They're all great, gripping plots. So this is the story. Her attempt to escape being impregnated against her will. Now, there's one other thing that I should mention to you that I forgot to mention at first. Carroll Wainwright says that this is an anti-natalist novel. And I didn't even know what antinatalism was. Antinatalism is the proposition that life, or at least life on this planet, should not exist. It's a curse. It should, the human species should be made to just die out. We should not reproduce anymore. And the reason for this is, first of all, there are a couple of them, I think. The reason for this is because, first of all, when a person is born, they have no say in the matter. It's out of their control. They don't have a choice of being born or remaining in oblivion, right? So that's the first outrage about it, that we're here against our will. We're stuck here whether we like it or not. And of course, once you are born and once you are part of life, well, what is life? I mean, fill in the blank. Some lunatic asylum. It's fraught with suffering, disease, sickness, old age, and then death. So as soon as you're born, you're condemned to live this crazy, tragic life, and after which you'll die, and you'll come to an end again, and you also know that you'll come to an end again. It's a very cruel fate to be born, and so it's better not to have been born at all. And this, I understand, is kind of what antinatalism is, and this is what Carroll Wainwright tries so hard to persuade us is the appropriate way to respond to life. Now, again, I didn't know that there was such a term for this sentiment. I mean, shit. I'm 71 years old now, and I've kind of felt this way more and more every year that I've existed. So I guess I've always been kind of a closet antinatalist, haven't I? So anyway, this is why Wainwright says that this is the most important novel or book that's ever been written. And so that basically is and of course, while Lisaveta, the unwilling virgin, has run off with Erasmus, her servant. I'm not going to give away the entire plot, but there are long passages interspersed throughout the entire novel, whether she's thinking to herself or whether she's in dialogue with Erasmus, who is very much of a like mind, or if she meets another character, a witch named Lilith, and she also is the same antinatalist like mind. And there are long sections of this book in which the notion of the proposition of antinatalism, of nobody should have been born and it's best just to let things die out, is discussed at great length. Wainwright has many arguments, or maybe it's just one argument, in which he talks about this. So this is basically the plot of the novel. And I have to say at the outright, before I go into my next section, I feel for Carroll Wainwright. I can tell, it's obvious, that Carroll Wainwright has spent an enormous amount of time giving us these sections where he talks about the curse that life is. And some of these are extremely eloquent. Some of these are extremely well written. Others of them I could do without. I'll get to this later. I personally think that he went on. The whole big purpose of his writing this novel, he says, is to kind of push this agenda of antinatalism. He doesn't talk so much about, he never really addresses the idea of writing a story for the sake of writing a story. When he talks about this book in his podcast, he's really talking about antinatalism. It's all about the antinatalism. And he doesn't really talk about just the pleasures of having written the story. He talks about how hard it was for him to write this story. And I can see why. Because he really wants to have an airtight argument for why antinatalism is the way to go. Okay? And believe me, as a writer myself, I know how it is to spend weeks, agonizing, back-breaking weeks writing passages for a book or for a story, and then sometimes, sadly, later on, in the fullness of time, you look back upon those particular passages that you agonized over, and you say, it's well written, but it doesn't fit into the story. It's happened to me a lot. Some of these sections that Wainwright talks about, describes concerning antinatalism, I think work. I think some of them do not work, but I certainly feel for him because I can tell how much time he's put into it, and I do appreciate that. Okay, on to the next section. Oh God, I have so much to talk about here. Okay, let's talk about, before we get to the subject itself of antinatalism. I mean, in the reviews that I've seen so far of this book, and in Wainwright talking about the unbearable heaviness of being himself, the emphasis has always been on the subject matter, on antinatalism, on the bitterness about being an unwilling participant in the human slop race, humanity. Okay, but I don't really hear anybody talking about the actual merits of the book as a story, as a book. So let's talk about the writing, the actual storytelling first. Well, you know, this is hard to talk about because the pros of the writing, in some instances, are also the cons of the writing. They're the same things that get in the way of the writing. I just want to tell you right now that I think, right off the bat, I think that Carroll Wainwright, whoever this guy is a wonderful writer. He's got an enormous amount of talent. I mean, as I was reading the book, I felt jealous. For the first 50 pages or so of reading this book, I felt jealous of Carroll Wainwright. I was hoping that Carroll Wainwright would fuck up, okay? That's how petty I am. And I am very petty. You know, we fledgling, we authors, self-published authors are all very, very petty. We want to be the best, you know, me included. So I was hoping that he would fuck up. I would say, you bastard, you write better than I do. You know, I can't pull off a book like this, you know, a fantasy dystopian novel like this. Damn you. Fuck up soon, will you? So I'm reading this thing, and he's doing a pretty good job. I'm impressed, you know, and I'm still impressed. He is a person who has a natural gift for words, for language. Let me just give you a couple of examples of this. On her face, she wore a smile as fragile as china. It's pretty good. His eyelids slid to her like His eyes slid to her like things badly oiled, and he nodded weakly. So he looks at her with his eyes as if the motion itself is a badly oiled mechanical motion. That's pretty good. I could probably write that, but it would take me a heck of a while to do it. Then he has these longer passages where he's talking about antinatalism, and some of these are just, well, before we even get to that, here's another one. He's talking about a building. I think it's the castle, one of the castles in one of the fiefdoms. Architecturally, of the Gothic mode, it thrust its ramparts and spires jaggedly into the air, not unlike the crystalline accretions in certain dripping antres. It's pretty good. And then he has some wonderful longer passages where he's talking about here's one more. These are just short sentences. She sighed, raising her gaze to the pale blue sky, where clouds slowly scudded like the froth of some inverted sea. So looking up at the sky, it's as if it's a sea which is turned upside down. That's what the clouds are. Instead of the white frothy waves, it's the clouds. That's pretty damn good. Now we get to the lengthier passages. I'm not going to go on long, but here's another one. She raised her eyes after a time to the night sky and beheld the stars shimmering there and wondered at them. She beheld, too, the interstitial darkness between those pinpricks of light, and she wondered at that as well. And she knew that the darkness would long outlast the stars. For the darkness was the true and permanent nature of the universe, while the stars were only a passing phenomenon. There would come a time when all the stars fell dark, and the music of the spheres was silence, and there reigned only an abiding darkness, a night without end. Wow. Wow. That is just wonderful. It's hard to believe with this kind of writing that this is only a dystopian fantasy novel, almost like a fairy tale novel with this kind of writing. This is the thing about this novel. It alternates between a fantasy adventure story and an extremely heavy philosophical tract. It's a very peculiar combination. So, but the writing is just wonderful. I would love to write like that. It's just a natural gift that this person has. I'm truly impressed by that. There's another thing also. Wainwright likes to use a lot of fancy words in this book, a lot of archaic words. And this is kind of funny in a way, because interspersed with these consciously wrought or selected archaic words, there will be a lot of modern parlance as well. I mean, he'll just talk in, a straightforward style sometimes as well. So it's kind of a combination of maybe an antiquated Victorian style of writing, but it's also very easy to read as well. And he has archaic words like ataraxia, macrosomia, anthrazoids or anthrazoides, unition, cataplectically, his enormous pillocock begins one sentence, and a pillocock is the same as a cock, but it's an antiquated way of saying it. Antre, A-N-T-R-E, dolent lancination. These are all archaic words I had to look up. There are so many more, and I had to look them up as I went along on Google, and I'm not quite sure why he did this. Ordinarily, when someone would write with these kinds of antiquated words, I would think that would be just a pretentious jerk. Now, Wainwright obviously is too smart for that. He's very aware of what he's doing. So I'm wondering why he does it. It doesn't disturb me that he did this. It doesn't really bother me. It does detract somewhat at certain points in the novel when he does this. But I'm wondering, does he do this because he wants the reader to know that this is an old style, antiquated fairy tale? He wants to remind the reader of it. He wants to set a certain mood or tone. I'm not quite sure, but it does have this in it. It is not the vocabulary is certainly not your conventional fantasy novel, I would imagine. So that's not really a pro or a con, just something I'm wondering about. Okay, now let's talk about the cons of this writing. Well, first of all, you have to remember this book is not what I would call literary fiction, because literary fiction is fiction which is not plot driven. It's very short on plot. It's more about the way that characters will perceive basically ordinary situations. That's my understanding of it. It's nothing fantastical happens. There's not a great flurry of action going on. It's more the way the characters perceive life. That's where all the invention is, and that's the kind of So it's not that. It's a fantasy, or it's an action novel, an escape novel, a fairy tale. It's kind of like a dark fairy tale. And the reason I say that chiefly is because the characters in this novel are very, very flat characters, very one-dimensional flat characters. Now, this is a detraction from it. If it's a literary novel, I suppose, which it's not. But it's not. It doesn't really detract from it, the novel, the fact that these characters are flat. It was still enjoyable reading, but I'm just making a note of it, that the characters are flat, as in a fairy tale. For instance, you've got the coxman, this crazy fucker in a cage who just is paraded around from fiefdom to fiefdom, who just is let out of the cage to fuck young virgins, and then put back into the cage. It's like Mango the Madman. It's funny, the conceit. It's almost like he's like a comic book character. And he's being led around and paraded by the stud master, who's making money off of the fact that this crazy fucker is inseminating all these women. And the stud master, so the coxman is just crazy, a crazy monster, a crazy lunatic monster. And by the way, the reason why the coxman is so valuable is because, as it turns out, he is immune to the Red Death. So that he's not infected, and he won't inseminate women and infect them, and their offspring will not be infected by it. Purportedly, they'll be immune to the Red Death. So that's why he's so valuable. So anyway, he's this mango-type Neanderthal guy. And then you got the stud master, who is a misogynist pig. He just says, he's just happy, as he puts it, to will go around from fiefdom to fiefdom, and they're just going to be more cunts to fuck. So he doesn't think very highly of women. None of the male characters in this novel think highly of women. They're all sort of like villains. It's very flat, one-dimensional. There's total dehumanization of women in this obviously in this fairy tale. He's a bad guy. And then you have the father of Lisaveta, the virgin, the unwilling virgin. His name is Lord Vax. And Lord Vax is another misogynist pig. He has, at one point in the novel, he has a conversation with the stud master, and they just talk about women in an extremely disparaging manner. Again, just about how they're cunts. In a way, I kind of was, almost brought a tear to my eye, the way that it reminded me of Tropic of Cancer. I counted Henry Miller using the word cunt in Tropic of Cancer about 65 times. After a while, it kind of loses its offensive nature. It's so over the top. And this is kind of over the top, too, this misogynation, the misogyny of these characters. So Lord Vax is a misogynist pig, too. And all of the soldiers are misogynist pigs. The male member, the penis. The penis is kind of a character too in this fairy tale. The penis is basically just a weapon, a brutal weapon used for brutalizing women. Phrases are used like, how many bitches has your boy fucked there? Men are evil in this fairy tale. That's why it's a very flat thing. Men bad, women sensitive, women victims. It's that kind of a flatness to it, which, as I say, it works. It works. In this book, it's an enjoyable read, but it's not by any means literary fiction. If you're looking for a great psychological depth, such as you're going to get in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which is very similar in sentiment to this novel, you're not going to get that kind of deep psychology that you get in Tess. It's just not like that. Then you have the figure of Erasmus. Erasmus is the servant who is secretly in love with Lisaveta, who runs away with him to escape her forceful impregnation. And Erasmus is the one sensitive male. Excuse me. He's the one sensitive male in this novel. He's always weeping. He's always extremely sensitive. He has an extremely large penis, as we learn later on in the novel, but he's very, very careful. He doesn't want to offend Elizaveta and, have sex with her, have impure thoughts. He's like this wet dream for every young girl in a romance novel. The sensitive and yet the sensitive man, respectful of women, who has the enormous cock, you know? I mean, this is also kind of very stereotypical, very cliched. It's kind of funny in a way. So yeah, and then you have Lisa Vetta, who is the main character, who is escaping from the coxman and her pig of a father and all these pigs of men, and she is kind of the mouthpiece for Wainwright, for extolling the virtues of antinatalism, the notion that life should never have begun in the first place because it's just it's an unfair proposition that one should be forced into life without having any say in the matter, and then having to suffer, kind of like Hamlet, you know, to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. And of course, like Hamlet, you know, he doesn't want to kill himself because he doesn't know what undiscovered country death may hold for him, and most of us don't. So that's the problem. So she's kind of she's the mouthpiece for this antinatalism stuff, and as again I said, everybody focuses on the antinatalism philosophical aspect of this novel and not the actual story writing. Is it an engaging novel? I think it's a very engaging novel, kind of in spite of the antinatalism aspect of it. Also, Lisa Vetta is a stereotype in the sense that she is the damsel in distress, right? I mean, she is going to be fucked by the evil, monstrous villain, the coxman. So it's the classic corny stereotype. But again, it's very peculiar in this book because, for me anyway, it doesn't detract from my having enjoyed the novel, you know, at all. And my hat is off to Wainwright for that. You know, he's a very skillful guy. And also, what's very, very kind of stereotyped and unbelievable is that Erasmus also, you know, harbors the same antinatalist attitude that Lisa Vetta does. And at a certain point in the novel, as they're escaping from the castle, they meet a woman. She's a witch. Her name is Lilith, and she also harbors the same antinatalist sentiments. As a matter of fact, she's actually thought about it on an even deeper level, if that's imaginable, than Lisa Vetta has. And she's kind of almost like Lisa Vetta's mentor for the brief time that they share together. So Lisa Vetta and Erasmus and Lilith, they're all of a like mind, and they all sort of converse philosophically with each other. It's, you know, it's a little bit hard to believe that in the midst of this apocalyptic nightmare where the Red Death is looming over everything, that these three would just magically find each other. It's unbelievable, but at the same time, it doesn't mar the story for me. Okay? And now we have the aspect of sex and violence, but I'll focus on the sex in this novel. Well, what can I say about the sex? I liked it. I liked it a lot. It's softcore porno, in a way. It's delightful. It's funny. It's consciously over the top at certain points. I liked it. It was sexy. It was very sexy too. I mean, in between this softcore porno aspect to it, you know, Wainwright has these archaic words, you know, which make it kind of funny and surreal and strange, and it's I really liked it. Okay, and I think that this kind of sex, I mean, I think that Hollywood, this book was just made for Hollywood. They would love this kind of a book. They would love this kind of sex that's depicted in this book. Some of it is very violent. Some of the sex, some people would find it offensive. I didn't find it offensive at all. But that's just me. I mean, some people would find, Tropic of Cancer offensive to women. Again, I mean, I did a book review of Tropic of Cancer. I mean, the misogyny or the dehumanization of women in Tropic of Cancer is so consciously over the top, so deliberately provocative that I can't really get righteously indignant over it, and neither can I with the sex as it's depicted in this novel. Okay, I got to take a break for a second. Hold on. I'm almost there. Okay, let's continue on with the next aspect of it. So I talked kind of about the writing. What about the actual philosophy of antinatalism in the book? Because that's what Wainwright talks about so proudly, that he has written the definitive, I guess, I don't know if he says this, but to me, I think he's saying it's totally the definitive anti-life, antinatalist book. Well, let me preface this by saying I don't really like reading stories that have any agenda at all, whether it's the agenda of antinatalism, whether it's an agenda about socialism, which it is in The Grapes of Wrath. I read The Grapes of Wrath recently also, and I thought it was a damn good book, I mean, it had a great deal. I mean, each of the characters in this book was a real character. It was unlike Carroll's book, it was the characters were not flat. They were real, living characters. Each one had their own distinct personality, the Joad family and so on. All of the characters, not just the Joad family. It was very, very expertly written. But the thing is, I don't like having the agenda of socialism rammed down my throat by John Steinbeck, which he does. Okay, I don't like these interchapters. I don't like it. I like a story to be told for the sake of telling a story, and that's it. And let me draw my own conclusions about life based on the story. I don't need the author telling me. Instead of having somebody lecture me, not that he was lecturing Carroll Wainwright, a little bit, but instead of having somebody lecture me or try to convince me how life is disgusting and hopeless and unfair and rotten, and how the human species is a botched species, a botched experiment that never should have been, which I agree with, instead of lecturing me or telling me about it, show me and let me reach the conclusion that the human species is botched. This is one of the pitfalls of this book, that he tries too hard to show you. And the reason he tries is because he's got this tremendous agenda. And this is why I would not put this book by any means the book that comes to mind immediately, which is the one I wish this had been, I suppose, is Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Tess of the D'Urbervilles essentially is, when you come away from reading that book, you essentially feel like you essentially have antinatalist sentiments. But Hardy doesn't lecture you about them. He shows you, and you've learned it for yourself. You become one in the process of reading this book, so to speak. At the very beginning of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Tess says to her younger brother at one point that the earth is a blighted place. It's a blighted, B-L-I-G-H-T-E-D. It's a blighted planet. He knows what he's doing, Thomas Hardy, but he's not heavy-handed about it. He tells the story and lets you draw your conclusions, and Wainwright doesn't. And this is the major problem that I would have with this novel of his. Sometimes the antinatalist sentiments work very well, very brilliantly, like I showed you that passage about where Elisaveta is looking at the stars and saying that the stars will disappear one day, there'll only be darkness. Sometimes it works beautifully in a chilling manner. At other times it just doesn't work. It just kind of, for me, detracts from the story. It's like, I don't need this. I don't need to have it constantly hammered into me. For instance, I mean, when Lilith and Elisaveta and Erasmus all meet up together in the woods, and Lilith, the witch, gives them a place to stay for a couple of days. I mean, the whole dialogue that they have about antinatalism is. It didn't really strike me as much. I wanted to keep going on with the story. I wanted to get off of this antinatalism stuff. And also, after a while, Erasmus and Elisaveta and Lilith, they were all kind of interchangeable to a certain extent. They were all just echoing each other's sentiments, more or less. And I didn't really care for that. And maybe this is just me, this is just my personality. Maybe it's because I'm an older person than Carroll Wainwright is. I'm about, I don't know how old he is, but I'm, like I say, 71. So if he's 35, then I'm twice his age now. And, when I was reading all this stuff about antinatalism, about how better it is not to have been born at all than to have been born into this. I kept thinking to myself that, when I was at college, I can remember so many, drunken conversations. I used to have all-night conversations when I was smoking pot with other, my friends at college, other students, and we would talk about the existence of God. Does God exist, or this or that, And they would go on all night, and nothing would be concluded, nothing would be learned from them. And over the years, more and more, to me, the most boring thing in the world to talk about, for instance, would be the existence of God. I mean, look, if you got about 4,000 or 5,000 hours to piss away, and if you don't have to work for a living, and you want to just chew the fat to kill time, you want to talk about the existence of God, whether God exists or not, knock yourself out. But to me, it's pointless. It's kind of dull and dry. It just is so open-ended, it goes on forever. And sometimes I think that he's very much to the point, Wainwright, but other times it just kind of is like a moot point. Okay, yeah, I mean, we're here now, and we're stuck here. I mean, how long do you want to talk about antinatalism, it's just not productive after a certain point. I mean, all you can do about it once you are born here is you can either have a vasectomy or get sterilized, wear a diaphragm. Vasectomy is probably better. You can do that, and you can consciously say to yourself, I'm not going to bring a child into the world, and that's it. Actually, this is a very, very apt subject because we now live in a world, especially in the U.S. here, where our economy is so abysmal, our political, geopolitical climate is so dismal. Civilization seems to be going down the crapper real fast. We have this New World Order, World Economic Forum, wanting to take everything away from us and literally make us be like serfs. And they're going to be the Lord Vax, So in a way, I've thought about this. It is kind of a shame for someone to consciously make the decision to bring a child into the world at this point. I've listened to a lot of people on YouTube, not a lot, but some people on YouTube who have consciously made the decision and who are married not to have children for just this reason. They don't want their children inheriting the $32 trillion worth of debt that we have, or what they say we have, and just having to pay for it for the rest of their lives. Their student loans, to work forever, never to have a house, to live in a totalitarian society. They don't want this, and I would agree with them. I mean, I have a daughter personally, but it was before, my daughter was born before all this craziness became as crazy as it is. So it is a very, very apt subject. But what can you do if you're here now? You can just say, I'm not going to have any children, okay? To me, personally, I address my main thrust is this, not so much the notion that we shouldn't have been born. My notion is we're here, we're stuck here, and the real issue, and we're stuck here with this very botched experiment called humanity. This gullible, well, I don't know how I'm going to describe humanity. The best way is just that they're just a botched species. The people on top who are trying to control the masses are botched in their own sociopathic way, and the people on the bottom who are too stupid to do anything but want to be led, we're also botched, and for giving them the power that they have. It's just a botched species. I mean, the longer you live, if you've lived until the time you're 45 or 50, and you don't know that we're a botched species, then you're brain dead. That's the way I feel about it. So we are botched. So the real question is, knowing that you're botched and knowing that you're stuck here on this planet, how do you live the rest of your, and if you're not going to kill yourself, how do you live the rest of your life? And not just live it. How do you live your life joyfully under those circumstances? That has kind of been the thrust of my own writing. As a matter of fact, I wrote 2 books, and the 2 books that I wrote, they were dedicated to the marooned. That's who I dedicate my books to. So I'm really very much along the same lines as Carroll Wainwright is. But I just focus on that aspect of it, to focus on why we shouldn't have been born and nothingness is better. Well, there's nothing I can do about it now, so I just don't pursue that any longer. And of course, there are other considerations too. Hold on a second, let me collect my thoughts here. So I think that he overdid it a little bit on the antinatalism. I think he made his point, but he was a little bit overkill. I think that the parabasis, I think it's called. I mean, after the novel ends, he has another section of about 10 or so pages called the parabasis, where he continues talking about antinatalism and all the philosophical considerations. Shouldn't have done that. I think that was overkill. You should have stopped the novel where the novel ended and left it at that. You didn't know where to stop it. I think I would have edited myself that way. Okay, so is this the greatest book ever written? He doesn't say it is, Wainwright, and it isn't the greatest book ever written. I mean, immediately what comes to mind that is a great book that's written kind of on the same subject would be Tess of the D'Urbervilles. There are many books, but it's not the greatest, and he knows it isn't. Is it the most important book ever written? No, I don't think it's the most important book ever written either. There have been many great books, or at least several great books throughout literature which address this subject more or less. The first one that comes to mind is, of course, Moby Dick, Captain Ahab. That comes to mind immediately. Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I mean, Sophocles says in I forget which one of the Oedipus plays. He says the biggest boon would be for a man not to have been born at all. So this has been around for a while, this subject. I mean, Nietzsche addresses this subject, and knowing that we're going to die, that we live in an amoral universe with a botched species, and that we're going to die, we're going to suffer the indignities of old age and infirmity. What's the point of living? What's the point of being here at all? Well, he addresses this as well. I mean, this is one of his main projects. As Carroll mentions himself, Schopenhauer talks about this. Many people, more than I know of. So it's not the most important book ever written. It is certainly a subject. Well, it's a timely subject, no question about it. But no, I do not feel that it is the most important book ever written. However, it is a I guess this is the hold on a second. Now, there's something else here before I go to my conclusion. Wainwright disparages himself and says, "I wouldn't try to sell this book to a literary agent or to get a literary agent interested." He says they would never be interested in this book. He says they weren't interested in the last book I wrote. Apparently, he wrote a previous book. He says they wouldn't even be interested in the Unbearable Heaviness of Being. So I'm not even going to do it that way. So I just self-published it. And I have to say, I think you're wrong about that. I think this particular book is exactly what a literary agent would be looking for, with the following amendation or proviso. It seems to me that the author wrote this book because he wanted to delve into the abyss of antinatalism. And the fact of the matter is that the antinatalism is not what makes this book work. This book is a hell of a good read. It's a very enjoyable read. It's an adventure story. It's a fantasy novel. It's got everything in it. It's got sex in it. It's got all of these stereotyped characters in it that people love, one-dimensional characters. I can see this book if it was marketed. The only thing is, I would say, if I was trying to really market this book for the general public, and even for Hollywood as a spin-off, I would say, great book, really great. Lose about 90% of the antinatalist shit, and you got yourself a real great fantasy, romance, dystopian novel, Carroll. This book to me has got more, compared to Harry Potter, come on. Harry Potter is garbage compared to this book. This guy knows how to write. This isn't just a series of unending little, adventures for a 13-year-old to read or something. It's this far outdoes Harry Potter. This would be like 50 Shades of Grey. This is the stuff that bestsellers are made of. I could see this thing a Hollywood movie in a heartbeat. It's got it all. You get yourself a couple of great Hollywood actors. The soft-core sex alone would make this novel. It's such a simple and yet compelling plot. This escape plot. Who would play the coxsman? This drooling lunatic with a cock the size of a forearm. Who would play him? Robert De Niro? I don't think so. He's too old for this. Somebody. Who would play the damsel in distress, Elizabeth? This is the stuff that commercial Hollywood crap movies are made of, So don't be offended, Carroll. I think you got yourself a real winner here. It's just the part about the antinatalism would not go over very well with young girls who were looking for a romance novel. They wouldn't be into the antinatalist life shouldn't have been born shit. They would be more into the Erasmus, the sensitive weeping guy with the big cock. They'd love that. It's and I'm not being tongue in cheek here. This would be a great novel if marketed properly. I would advise you to send as many query letters as you can to agents and market as that. Downplay the antinatalist stuff. Talk about all the things that I did, about the softcore sex, about the very, very easily digestible plot of this novel. Outline the characters. It's a real winner, in my opinion. I'm jealous of you. If I was going to write a commercial novel, this would probably be it for me, So that's my 2 cents. I'm not trying to offend you. The writing you did was, well, anyway, let's get back to the writing of it. So anyway, so that's it. My conclusion is that no, it is not the greatest book ever written. It is not the most important book ever written, but Carroll Wainwright is a damn good writer. And what's peculiar about it is he has I don't know. He's made this peculiar, cliched, stereotypical fairy tale fantasy novel, and yet there are certain points in it where it's quite magical. He uses language beautifully. You can't be taught this. So it's a quick read. Like I say, a very enjoyable read. If you get this novel, whether you buy this novel. You will not be wasting your time by any means at all. As a matter of fact, you should charge more money for this novel, Carol. You're giving it away at $7, whatever it is, $7. It's a wonderful novel, and you have to take it in stride. Like I say, it is not Tess of the D'Urbervilles, but I was really very surprised that a young man could write so well. And as I said before, I am jealous. God damn you. Okay. And so I would be interested also, Carol. I will be interested in you writing a novel that isn't fantasy, that isn't dystopian. Because, one of the reasons that I'm against fantasy dystopian novels is that, when a writer doesn't write well, doesn't have great verbal facility, they will use action, plot, as a crutch to cover up the fact that they really don't write very well. So whenever they feel their writing is not great, let's throw in another character. Let's have another violent scene. This is the way most movies are made. They're stupid movies, but they just throw in a lot of sex and violence. And the same is true, I feel, for fantasy novels. It covers up the innate lack of verbal facility. You have verbal facility, great verbal facility. So it will be very interesting to see you write a novel which isn't in this vein, not a fantasy novel, but a novel of literary fiction, a novel which is not plot-driven, a novel where I don't know what it would be about, but something where it doesn't have this one-dimensional, flat, bevy of characters. I'd like to see what you have. I mean, my opinion is this: if a person is a profound person, all they have to do is take a pad and a pencil and write something. Give it some thought, but write a story, write something that appeals to them. And if there is any profundity in them, it will come out and it will be apparent. You don't have to consciously try to be deep. And I think this novel does try a little bit too much to consciously be profound. It's not necessary to do that if you are a profound person. Your sensibilities will themselves be profound, and it will become apparent as the novel progresses. And I would be curious to see what kind of a novel you might write on a different track. Like I said, a work of literary fiction. Whether you do it or not, I don't know. So congratulations. It was, and I appreciate the amount of time that you put into this novel, the back-breaking amount of time you put into it, because it does, with all of the different faults and different, pot shots, I take it, I don't know if it's, no, not really pot shots, but all the different kinds of constructive criticisms that I pile on this novel, it hangs together. It does, for the most part, work very well. It was very interesting to read, and I enjoyed reading it. So thanks a lot.